Hello, everybody, and welcome to a special episode of JTV, where we're joined by Shabbos Kestenbaum. It's a great name, Shabbos. He rose to fame recently for, number one, as a Harvard student, deciding he's going to take legal action against them for their failure to address anti-Semitism, which, of course, depends on the context. And he also has been as far as I understand, a lifelong Democrat who has decided to support the Republicans, to support Trump in the upcoming election because of his deep concerns around in his view, the Democratic Party's inability or lack of willingness to fully confront anti-Semitism in the same way that he believes the Republican side will. And that's obviously a very brave move to be doing that, given your lifelong associations, probably fighting against Republicans. And so I would really like to get into all those topics with you. I saw just last week, Shabbos, that you were at the Ohel, the grave of the late Rebbe, with Trump himself. First question to ask is, I know Ben Shapiro was also there. How was that? How did you find that moment? Obviously, it was on October 7th, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was on October 7th. I was asked by the campaign if I'd be able to make it to the Ohel to be there with the former president. And I've gone to a couple of events. I've met him a few times, but obviously October 7th, obviously being at the resting place of the Lubavitcher Rebbe really adds a different dimension, a more spiritual component to it. And it was moving. I think regardless of whether one supports the former president or not, the fact that you have a former president and someone who could be the president again, who is showing up for the Jewish community in such a real, visible way, it really demands Hakaras Hatov, really demands our appreciation and respect. And I'd also add that Kamala Harris and Tim Walz were invited as well to pray with us, and they said no. So very appreciative to President Trump for doing this. He told me when I was mentioning, because of your executive order in 2018 on Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, we have a legal claim against Harvard University. He sort of pulled me in and said, you have to keep fighting these guys, keep fighting. So it was a special moment.
Wow. And before I'd like to talk all about the Harvard and everything that happened there and situation for students, but I'd like to start off with this, talking about the political side of things, because it's interesting that, as you say, I think you said in your speech at the RNC that, you've been a lifelong Democrat. What would you say it was for you that led to your journey to deciding, actually, this time round, I'm going to be supporting the Trump campaign?
Sure. So first of all, I still am a registered Democrat. That really bothers the Trump campaign. It really bothers the Republican Party, which I can understand. But there are certain progressive policy prescriptions that I believe in that are simply not Republican hallmarks. So things like a $15 minimum wage, things like a variation of the Green New Deal, things like reproductive rights for women. These are just not in the Republican platform. However, certainly because of October 7th, like many, many liberal American Jews predominantly vote for the Democratic Party, I've sort of become a one-issue voter in a way that I just never was before. I voted for Bernie Sanders. I supported Jamal Bowman in 2020. And then, of course, I supported his primary opponent and did some fundraisers for him, George Latimer. We got him in, thank God. But at the end of the day, I spent these past 11 months, trying to work in a personal capacity to get the Democratic Party to, for example, have a Jewish student speak at the Democratic Convention for 2 minutes. Tried getting them to pass and take seriously the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act, the Countering Anti-Semitism Awareness Act, the Deterrent Act. And the fact of the matter is, Chuck Schumer, who's the highest ranking Jewish elected official in the United States, the Senate Majority Leader, he has refused to bring those pieces of legislation to a Senate vote. The fact of the matter is, when I testify in front of the United States Congress about anti-Semitism, the ranking Democratic member, Jerry Nadler, fell asleep. When I testified a separate time, the highest ranking Democratic member on the Education Committee, Bobby Scott, he criticized the committee for focusing on anti-Semitism. So I didn't want to say these things for 11 months because I wanted to appear either bipartisan or nonpartisan. But there's a limit to how much good faith I can really give my party. And I think when you have Israel as an existential issue and you have 7 American hostages, when you have rampant campus anti-Semitism, Kamala Harris has not met with a single Jewish student since October 7th. Donald Trump has had 4 events with Jewish students in the last 2 months alone. So I think we have to recognize that, yes, there are many things we disagree with the president on. I did not support him in 2016. I did not support him in 2020. I did not support him 5 months ago. But credit where credit is due. He signed that executive order. He brought regional peace in the Middle East with the Abraham Accords. He moved the embassy to Jerusalem. I mean, you can't argue with his very, very strong track record. So I'm a surrogate for the campaign. I've spoken at a few of his rallies, and I'm encouraging the Jewish American community to say, look, we don't like him as a morally upstanding individual. We disagree with many of his policies, but the fact of the matter is he is the only person who cares about our interests. And in the same way the African American community should vote for their interests, I think the American Jewish community should be a little selfish and vote for our interests too.
And what do you say to those who would say these issues that you're talking about, we've been noticing them way before Kamala Harris, and this is with Obama we were noticing severe hostility towards issues of Jewish interest, or certainly the way treating the state of Israel, and just like perhaps as a result of that, a disregard for the kind of anti-Israel narratives that will exist on campuses and anti-Jewish narratives. Talking about, he said recently about, both sides have blood on their hands, to which lifelong Democrat Alan Dershowitz said, I'm ending my friendship with you, like creating these moral equivalences in the aftermath of October 7th, when there's such a clear moral differentiation. I'm curious what you say to those who say, like, why only now? Like, this has been it's been an issue for a while.
So this is where I become very bipartisan, because I get death threats from the far left and the far right. They both don't like me. The Republican Party and Jewish conservatives have a tremendous problem with me, because they'll ask that very same question. And they'll say, well, you still self-identify as a Democrat, so we can't really trust you. And the Democratic Party sees me hanging out with Trump and say, well, you're a MAGA fascist, so we can't trust you. And I'm caught between a rock and a hard place. The problem with American electoral politics is, unlike your system in the United Kingdom, it's not a parliamentary system. We don't have coalitions. We don't even have political nuance. We have a binary system where either the Democrat wins or the Republican wins. It's either or. And my perspective is, given that binary choice, even though I disagree with the president on many issues, he would be better for our interests, as I said. So I'm sort of caught between a rock and a hard place, because I would have loved to support the Democratic nominee for president. I would have loved to have taken this issue seriously, but they never did. So even though I still believe in many of their policy prescriptions, at the same time, I can't identify with the party anymore. So it's a very difficult and lonely and isolating experience. Now, in terms of the specifics of your question of, well, how come you didn't see this before? When I was 17 years old, I was at the Democratic National Convention, and I had an Israeli flag, and I was called a terror sympathizer. Your listeners can Google my name and type in, Breitbart. That was the news organization that wrote an article about me. And as a 17-year-old, I remember I was quoted saying, I recognize that there's anti-Semitism in my party, and I'm going to specifically stay in the party so I can make a difference. So of course I knew that there was this anti-Israel, anti-Semitic undercurrent. I was not that naive. When I supported Bernie Sanders, I did not agree with his foreign policy. I did not agree with his support for the boycott, divestment, sanction movement. But I didn't think it particularly mattered, because Israel's existence, Israel's legitimacy, and its survival was never a question. I'd never agreed with Jamal Bowman's position on Israel. But as I said, I just didn't think it was relevant, because
What do you mean?
domestic. Well, because I'll put it this way. On the night of October 7th, I was at Harvard Chabad, and all these rumors began to circulate. There was a bombing, there was a shooting, no, it was a stabbing. The reality is your listeners can sympathize with, having Israel in the 21st century means that there is terrorism. It's not good, we don't like it, but it exists. For the first time in my life, though, and for the first time in many, in fact, all of our young Jewish lives, we were confronted with a new reality, and that is Israel as an existential issue. Israel, where its legitimacy, its survival, and its existence is very much called into question. we never experienced Israel like that before. I mean, Israel is a place where we visit our grandparents, where we study in yeshiva, where some of us might live, but it's a nation. Its survival is not a question. The same way you don't question the survival of the United Kingdom or Zimbabwe. And of
Mm.
course, that all changed, and that is what prompted this ideological evolution of sorts, because I realized that no, foreign policy does matter, that the support for boycott, divestment, sanction is a litmus test as to whether I will support you as a policymaker. So it's not that I suddenly became aware of these issues. I always knew those issues existed. I just didn't think that in the grand scheme of things, it would be that consequential. As I said, American electoral politics are binary games. It's a zero sum game. So you either vote for Bernie Sanders or you don't. He's either in power or he isn't. And I figured, even though I disagree with his foreign policy, that is outweighed by my support for his other political issues. And now I realized, as I said, I've become a one issue voter, that no, we have to take care of our own. We have to ensure the survival of the state. We have to ensure the release of the hostages. We have to ensure that Jewish students in the United States can go to class freely and without discrimination, oppression, or persecution. And that's why I took a relatively drastic step of telling the Trump campaign, okay, I'm on board, and let me know what I can do to help.
But a lot of people also would say that it's not just Jewish issues, though, really, because America turning its back on Israel, turning its back on, or really enabling Jew haters on campuses and things like that, that's not going to be good for America's own societal cohesion and moral standing and political standing in the long run, if that's what the case of history tells us. So I sometimes get pushback from that in the comments, because they're like, this isn't just about the Jews, really. It's far wider than that as well. One thing that I'd love your reflections on, and it's just interesting to me, is that we find that most Jews in America are voting Democrat than Republican, but that's because that's among most Jews who are secular or not Orthodox. But in the Orthodox world, it's overwhelmingly Republican, the Jewish, and so you're quite an interesting minority in that. Understand you're Orthodox, but also progressive. I'm just curious if you could just talk to me about that, because it's pretty uncommon match.
I am still the only Orthodox Jew that I know of who voted for Bernie Sanders twice. Let me first just quickly respond. Let me first quickly respond to your first point. And again, this is where I say that American politics is just so silly, and there are no winners, because when I speak to the American national media, when I speak at Trump rallies, when I speak to the campaign, I don't make it a Jewish issue. I don't. Yeah, I talk about anti-Semitism, but in the much greater context of this is a infringement on religious liberties and the foundations of our country. And in fact, again, it's just so silly. I have gotten so many angry texts and voicemails and emails from total strangers saying, you have made such a Chilul Hashem, a desecration of God's name, because you don't care about the hostages. You just care about the Americans. Because when you talk about the hostages, you only say the 7 American hostages. What about the other, 80 plus? And of course I care about all the hostages. I mean, what a ridiculous accusation. The reality is, if you want the American people to care about the hostages, they're not going to care about names that they can't even pronounce. They're going to care about Hersh Goldberg Poland because he's an American boy who played basketball in New York. I wish that wasn't the case. I wish that we could care and talk about all the hostages, but that's just not how politics work. So of course I'm only going to talk about the 7 American hostages. Of course I'm going to talk about that the protesters burn American flags. Now, do they burn Israeli flags too? Yeah, obviously, but why would that be relevant to the American people? So I try to make this as palpable to the common American man as much as possible, because to your point, you're absolutely right. It's not just a Jewish issue. It's not just a anti-Semitism issue. But when you have the best and brightest young minds who are burning American flags, who are talking about globalizing the Intifada, who are talking about ending the capitalist system and overthrowing the patriarchal American government, that is an attack not just on Jews, but on our Western civilization, on the heart of our liberal democracy, on our American values. And that's the point that I will keep raising. And that's where I say, American politics, it's just so silly. It's just so frustrating, because I get so much criticism from Jewish people for saying it. Now, in terms of your other question, it's, as I said, it's incredibly ideologically isolating. So the polls show that if you're a Jewish American and your top concern is Israel, the hostages, anti Semitism, then overwhelmingly, we're talking about margins of 90% plus, overwhelmingly, your support will be for President Trump. Now, if you're a Jewish American whose main concern is reproductive rights, whose main concern is the LGBTQ plus community, which for the overwhelming majority of American Jews, that is their concern, then yes, roughly 70 to 75% of the American Jewish community is supporting Kamala Harris. Now, I think the polling is a little skewed because most of the polling is conducted by the Jewish Democratic Council of America, which has obviously a bias. They do what's called a push poll. So I think President Trump will actually get roughly 40% of the American Jewish vote, which would be the most votes any Republican nominee has gotten from the Jewish community since Dwight Eisenhower. So that's actually quite significant. In a state like Pennsylvania, where 3% of the state is Jewish, 40% of the Jewish vote could be enough to swing the state. So that's actually quite high. However, and this, I'll use a dirty word again, context. I'm a Harvard student, so we don't say context anymore. It's been soiled. But the greater context, I would say, is much more worrying. There is a dirty secret, which is at Harvard University, at Columbia, at all these elite universities that had encampments, protesters who followed me on their way to class, who called for an intifada, who violated all time, place, and manner restrictions, who called for the destruction of the Jewish state from the river to the sea. Many of them were Jews. Many of them were Jewish people. And I was just in Toronto yesterday, and I made this point. I said it was so sad. It was so painful to walk past Jewish people calling for the violent overthrow of the Jewish state, calling for mass violence against Jewish people, and to see how our Jewish community failed them. Because these are people who, by and large, cannot point to Israel on the map, cannot speak Hebrew, have never been to a Jewish day school, have never had a Jewish summer camp experience. If you would ask them what this week's Torah portion is, they wouldn't really know what you're referring to. How we failed that community. And I think if you really want to combat anti-Semitism, if you really want to ensure that the next generation of Jewish Americans or the Jewish people feel identified with their culture, feel identified with the values, and feel identified with our land, we need to invest in Jewish education. It's shocking to me that organizations that are set up exclusively to fight anti-Semitism are raking in hundreds of millions of dollars since October 7th. But here in the United States, we still have what's called the yeshiva tuition crisis, where Jewish Americans aren't going to Jewish day schools because it's too expensive. That's where we need to put our resources. That's where we need to put our financial means, because a significant amount of American Jews are so embarrassingly, so shockingly uneducated, know
Yeah.
nothing about their
Yeah.
identity.
Yeah.
And that's why you can have a significant amount of American Jews who see what's going on in Israel, who see what's going on with their brethren on college campuses and say, it doesn't matter. It doesn't affect me. That to me is the scariest part of this whole story of the last 12 months.
Yeah, yeah, and we often say on JTV that as instead of fighting anti-Semitism, which obviously we need to be doing, but equally we need to be creating pro-Semitism as a much more powerful and potent strategy in a way. Don't just fight the darkness, spread more light. And the only way you can do that is by having religiously and historically literate Jews who know who they are, who understand what our values are, what our connection is to the land, etc., and we can express that and be that and demystify ourselves to the world, because so many of the issues we see with students and others are just down to ignorance. But I'm just curious if you could just talk a bit more, just personally, about this interesting like dichotomy that I was touching on before about being both Orthodox and being progressive politically. Just if you could just expand a bit more on that personal side as well. I'm just curious because I say it's rather uncommon, and I wondered how you kind of how you frame it in your mind, because often people, let's say a Ben Shapiro type, would say that he just finds often values just don't align between the two camps.
Yeah, it's funny. Ben told me yesterday, he said, Shabbos, how's it like being on the Republican dark side for the first time? And I said, well, Ben, I'm still not really a Republican. And he said, not yet, but there's always hope. So, in the same way that when someone like Ben reads the Torah, he perceives a conservative bias, or he conserves an interpretation that is more aligned with the Republican values. For whatever reason, when I read that same Bible, when I read that same religious narrative, I envision a society that has a strong social safety net. I envision a society that cares about the most vulnerable. I envision a society whereby healthcare is not denied to an individual, where people of different persuasions or sexual orientations, yes, it may not be something that we encourage, but it's certainly something that we accept and tolerate. And honestly, I never really understood why more Orthodox Jews didn't see that biblical interpretation, didn't see that society that I very clearly felt the Bible was trying to create. I mean, for example, you have Jewish laws that mandate charity, that mandate progressive taxation. You know, if you're a wealthy individual, there's an expectation that the sacrifice in the temple you were given was of a higher quality, a higher barometer than that of someone who's economically disadvantaged. That in your field, you leave a certain portion for the poor in your society to glean from. That to me is a progressive society, and I never understood why more Jews didn't see it that way. I really didn't.
Yeah, it's interesting. I sort of feel like with a lot of these issues, particularly around economic and social structures, that you can kind of make arguments and things either way. And that to me, actually, it seems that Judaism is actually far more concerned less with any one big political or social structure and more about the actions of the grassroots, the individual, and working that way up. It prescribes much more of our actions in that regard. I heard a beautiful talk by a rabbi here in London a few years ago, who was saying how the Torah starts off with like two opposing societies that we kind of have more of a debate around in the slightly more center ground of. You have totally libertarian anarchy of the flood world, pre-flood world, and then utter state control of the building the Tower of Babel. And both of them are dysfunctional. And then you come in with the story of Abraham, that individual building his family, slowly building a nation, all the interpersonal relationships, challenges, jealousies, hatreds, building families, all those things. And he said, and the Torah is really telling us that actually that's where the real work is. And I just thought it was an interesting point
Well,
just to raise in this
well,
debate.
the story of Abraham is interesting because that sort of solidifies why the Torah is not conservative, because he allowed all of those visitors to eat in his tent for free. You would never get a Republican doing that, all right? The Republican would give him a surcharge of like $20 to eat there. So that is a very liberal thing to do.
But then people like Ben Shapiro and others would respond by saying, actually, there is disproportionate amount of charitable giving among people who lean more conservatively and religiously than those who are, say they have more of a statist view of the world and say let's rely on the state. So I do think you can argue it either way, and
He's
we're
right.
limited on
He's
time.
right, by the way.
Sorry.
There's a tremendous amount of hypocrisy within modern day liberalism. I totally agree with him.
Anyway, let's touch on what's happening at Harvard and with students. So tell us, just for those who aren't already familiar, many will be, but for those who aren't familiar, can you just give us a brief summary of the build up to what happened where you decided I'm going to take legal action against Harvard, and tell us about where you're up to at the moment?
Sure. So I'll do it in a nutshell. Number one, our lawsuit is available online. I encourage all the readers to read it. When I got into Harvard, I guess 3 years ago, I actually found out that I was accepted in Auschwitz-Birkenau, which is a story for another time. My immediate reaction was not great. Now I can sue them. My immediate reaction was great. Now I can be part of an environment and a culture whereby not only am I gaining from other religious backgrounds, from a diverse range of thoughts, but I can also contribute. As an Orthodox Jew, I can be of value. I studied religion at Harvard. I was the only one in my school who was Orthodox. I wore a kippah, of course, kept Shabbat, kept kosher, and I was aware that, fortunately or unfortunately, I was representing something bigger than myself. I wasn't just there as Shabbos Kestenbaum, but I was there as Shabbos Kestenbaum, who's an Orthodox Jew. So I took classes that challenged me to go beyond my intellectual comfortable limits. So classes called Religion, Nationalism, and Settler Colonialism, the Case of Israel-Palestine, Narratives and Displacement, the Case of Israel-Palestine. There's a lot of case for Israel-Palestine at Harvard. They are singularly obsessed with this very, very small country. And not only that, I joined the Jews for Palestine Liberation, not as a member, but as an observer, as someone who said, look, we don't agree with each other on many things, but I respect your right to be here. And I wanted to show that I'm not this insular, misogynist, Orthodox Jew that many of you probably surmise or assume that I am. And there was anti-Semitism. I wrote an article for H.com called Anti-Semitism at Harvard, and I wrote it in October of 2022. And the article went nowhere. I don't think anyone really read it, but it was there. I mean, just look at the numbers. At its peak, Harvard was 25% Jewish. Today, it's 4% Jewish. It's not because Jews got dumber over time. It's because there has been a deliberate effort to crack down on the amount of Jews at Harvard University. And again, I can go on and on, but it was there. Anti-Semitism did not fall out of the sky on October 7th. However, I will jump ahead to October 7th, and people often ask me, what was anti-Semitism like post-October 7th? And the reality was, there was no post-October 7th. There was the night of October 7th. As Jews like myself were contacting our loved ones to see if they were okay. There were 34 student groups at Harvard University representing more than 1,000 students who saw the images of Jewish women bleeding from their private areas, who saw the images of Jewish babies crying as they're being hoarded onto motorcycles taken into Gaza, who saw the images of burnt bodies in cars, and their immediate reaction, this is America's most intelligent, most progressive, most elite, these students jumped out of beds in their pajamas to draft what they called an emergency statement to blame Jews for the largest massacre of Jews since the Holocaust. The beginning of the statement literally said, we hold the Israeli apartheid regime entirely responsible for all unfolding violence in the Middle East. You know how many times they mentioned or condemned Hamas? Zero. Zero. And the faculty at my school, at the Religion and Public Life Department, released a similar statement just 3 days later, not mentioning Hamas, saying that there are both sides to this. You can't start the story on October 7th, but you have to go back to the Nakba. And that just opened the floodgates. Because yes, there was anti-Semitism pre-October 7th, but from October 7th onwards, it was inescapable, it was unavoidable. I'll just give you a laundry list of incidents. We had a physical assault against a Jewish student at Harvard Business School. We had a Jewish student spat on for wearing a kippah. We had an Israeli student being told by her professors to leave the class because her nationality made other people uncomfortable. There was a staff member who vandalized our posters, challenged me to debate him as to whether Jews were behind 9/11, and then threatened me with a machete. I had private armed security outside my house for a week. I had a guy with a gun follow me to Chabad to make sure I was okay.
Wow.
I mean, this is unthinkable and unfathomable that this could have happened not only in the United States, where religious freedom is paramount, but where we have, as Jewish people, we have not been guests in this country. We have been part of this country. We've never felt like an other. We've never felt like a minority group. We are Americans. And of course, as you alluded to, you have the December 5th congressional testimony where our own president of the university says you actually can call for the genocide of Jewish people depending on the right context. And what a slap in the face, because she would have never have said that about other minority groups, because Harvard University makes it its business to coddle all other minority groups, to have safe spaces and trigger warnings and sensitivity training. And that sort of solidified that we are treated qualitatively different than other minority groups. And as I said, there are other incidents. For the sake of time, I won't get into it, but certainly, have me back, and I'm happy to get into it, or happy for your readers to read the lawsuit. But I decided early on that we had a legal claim. As I mentioned, President Trump in 2018 signed an executive order that reclassified Judaism under the law. So Title
By the way,
VI of the
do
Civil
you have a
Rights.
background in law?
I don't have a background in law. No, I'm just someone who has lawsuits. But funnily enough, I'm actually not that interested in the legal field. I'm actually really not. I'm really interested in religion and politics. That's my specialty. So in 2018, President Trump signed an executive order that reclassified Judaism under the law. Title VI of the Civil Rights Act is a provision that prohibits public institutions, certainly one that receives federal dollars, from discrimination based on certain categories. Religion was not a protected class. National origin was. So what President Trump did is said, well, just reclassify Judaism. You're no longer just a religion. You are also an ethnicity. And because we are now an ethnicity under the laws of the federal government, we are now protected under the National Origin Clause. And so I realized quite quickly, we have a real claim They are treating us differently. They're violating their obligations under federal law. So I decided to sue. To me, it was not a brave decision. It wasn't a monumental decision, but it was the only way that I felt that there could be recourse and equality and equity for Jewish students. I'm sad. I'm bothered that it took legal action for the broader community to understand this issue is serious, for Harvard University to take the issue seriously. But I'm very proud at the same time of the lawsuit that we put together, and I stand by every word. We are the first case in American history pertaining to the civil rights violations of Jewish students that's going to trial. This has never happened before. These cases have either been dismissed outright or some of them have been settled, but a judge ruled 2 months ago, quote, "The facts as pled show that Harvard failed its Jewish students." And I'm so proud that this lawsuit will see its day in court, because it's not about me and it's not even about Harvard, but it's about sending a message to American Jewry and to global Jewry that we are sick and tired of being sick and tired. And if our civil rights will not be given to us, we will demand them, and we will hold those institutions of power accountable. And Harvard better be nervous, because guess what? The facts as pled are, in fact, the facts. And I have
Mm.
nothing to hide. I will be deposed by Harvard University, and I hope it can be live streamed, because I want the American people to see exactly how they've been treating Jewish students on their campus.
So it's going to be live streamed.
It won't be, but I hope it is.
Oh, you hope it is. You hope it is. And when are you expecting to go to trial?
We don't have dates just yet. Things are still up in the air, but my attitude is sooner rather than later. I want
Mm.
everything as fast as possible and as public as possible, but I don't believe we have dates just yet.
Okay. Well, I think it's monumental what you're doing, and it's so important. And I guess watch this space. Let's see what happens. But it's clear as day to anyone with any sanity that you're in the right in this case, and that there is a clear double standard that's been applied, and unacceptable treatment of Jewish students who, not just at Harvard, but ironically across most of the elite institutions, the academic institutions, are feeling disproportionately uncomfortable, unsafe. The last question would be, what's your focus right now in the coming days, weeks, months? Where's your head at? What are you focused on doing?
So I'll put it this way. I mean, this is a British channel after all, and my family's all in London, so I do feel part of the United Kingdom. You know, Dove Foreman's grandmother, Lily, of course, just passed away yesterday. And I reached out to Dove, but I also spoke. I speak at a different city every day. And I spoke to an audience last night, and I mentioned Lily. And I said, we Jewish people, especially young Jews, we are standing on the shoulders of giants. And I was speaking in Miami about a month ago. And during my talk, an old woman raises her hand. And normally that's never a good sign. You know, I've been protested, I've been heckled, I've had people throw rocks. So normally when someone wants to interrupt, nothing good's going to come from it. But she stands up and she says, I'm 102 years old. I am a survivor of the Majdanek concentration camp, a survivor of Bergen-Belsen, a survivor of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. We will get through this because we've gotten through it before. And then she sits down, and I'm expected to just continue my speech. But that to me personifies and solidifies everything right and everything whole and everything good about our people. We'll get through this because we've gotten through it before. And so my headspace, my actions for the last few months, and will be for as long as I can, is to meet those young Jews. I just spoke 7 times in Toronto yesterday, and one day I was a little exhausted, but I'm so motivated to do it because I meet young Jews and I say it is more important than ever to wear your Star of David, to wear your kippah, to identify as Jewish, to be as loudly and publicly and as confidently Jewish in as many settings as you can, to contrast our values with that of our ideological adversaries, to recognize the history that you are a part of, to recognize the people that have influenced you, whether you realize it or not. And that to me is my focus. We are part of the greatest story ever told. That is the story of the Jewish people. It's a tragic story. It's a beautiful story. It's a funny story. It's a sad story. It's so many things. And I encourage the young Jewish generation, of which I'm a part of, to tap into that history, tap into that story, because you whether you like it or not, are the authors of the next chapter in the book of Jewish history. And I encourage you to be that author. Don't allow your story to be written and defined by those who seek to oppress, discriminate, and persecute us. But take an active role in Jewish life. Take an active role in the Jewish community. And I've been so blessed, I've been so privileged and fortunate to travel across the world, not yet to the United Kingdom, that's a plug, but to travel across the world and to bring that story to as many different people as possible, to show them that Am HaNetzach Lo Mefached, that the Jewish people have nothing to be scared about, nothing to apologize for. The world needs our values. The world needs our light now more than ever. That's my message.
Well, I'm not going to add anything because I think that's such a powerful and poignant and true way to finish. So Shabbos, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for all that you're doing. And hopefully we can speak again soon with some positive updates on the work you're doing. Thanks so much.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
If you've made it so far in this video, I have a request for you. JTV has been having a really big impact in spreading the truth about Israel and creating positive associations with the Jewish people, Judaism, and Israel. We've really grown a lot, particularly in the last year, and we're having a really significant impact, both for Jews and non-Jews. But I really want to take JTV to the next level so we can start to compete with the other big online media beasts that are often peddling anti-Israel content. And the way we're going to do that is to scale even faster. So I'd love to build a team where we have other presenters doing shows like me. Let's start doing documentaries, supplementary content, animated content, etc., etc. And to do that, I'd like to build a bit of a team. So what we're going to do is we're going to do one fundraising day, just one, where we try and build up some funding in order to fund such a team. Now, to do that, it's going to obviously require people to get involved. And I'm wondering if you would consider, if you're watching JTV content and appreciate what we do and want to help partner with us in taking this to the next level and spreading the truth farther and wider than ever before, I wonder if you'd consider partnering with us simply by running a mini page on the fundraiser that we do, where you just reach out to your contacts on that day that we choose to fundraise and see if they'll all chip in. If you'd be up for doing that, of which I would be so grateful, then please click on the Google form link in the video description of this video, where you can simply just put in a few contact details. It'll be a very small commitment, as I say, literally just one day that we'll all agree upon as a collective community. But the impact is going to be so big. There's such strength in numbers. If we all pull together and do this, we can take this to the next level. And as I say, all of us can partner together in bringing and spreading the truth to the whole world. So please do consider clicking on that link, filling in the form, and I'll be in touch very soon to talk about the next steps. Small commitment, but a big impact. Hi, thank you so much for watching. To watch another one, click here. To stay up to date with all our content, click here to subscribe. And if you're able to, you can help support JTV to grow and grow by clicking join below this video, where you can become a member and get perks including early access to videos and private live discussions with me. But most of all, you'll be partnering with us on our mission to change the world.